So yeah, I just wanted to talk quickly 2 minutes about what happened. So Gradle Summit happened in the middle of last month. It's now the 1st of July, so yes, it was last month. It's a 2-day conference. There's about, 150, 200 people who attended. It's basically Gradle engineers talking about features in Gradle. It's Gradle customers talking about what plugins they've written, what plugins they've used. A few of the larger companies like Netflix and LinkedIn, they've actually got a pretty big Gradle ecosystem, and they've built their libraries of plugins and made Gradle into something else entirely. So there's a lot of stuff that happens in Gradle, and I just wanted to give you guys a very quick and very biased view of what happened. So I suppose the major things I've listed down on this slide, the kind of the news that came out of the keynote. There's a new configuration model, which it's been something that's been worked on for the last year or so. So if you have been following Gradle very closely, you probably have been aware of how native support and this new way of modeling JVM libraries and components. Just a quick question, who has done any Android development with Gradle? Okay, I've got a couple in the audience. So basically, a lot of this comes out of Android picked Gradle a few years ago for basically doing its builds, and one of the reasons was that Gradle's got a really extensible model behind it, and they took that model and they extended that model so that basically they could model different kinds of variants of what you're building. So with an Android app, you're not just building a Java app, you're building a Dalvik binary that runs on ARM, or a Dalvik binary that runs on, I don't know, pick your CPU, Atom, or, sorry?
Android runtime is fine for now.
Yeah, and Art, and you've got a whole bunch of different variants. And so Android did a very good job of modeling that in Gradle and being able to produce all the binaries that you need. Except that the thing was that a lot of the plugins and stuff, because they did something so customized, a lot of existing Gradle plugins didn't really work or know about what Android did. So we've worked really closely with the Google guys, and a lot of this stuff about the new configuration model is around being able to model a lot of the stuff that they were trying to do, so that not just Android, but a whole bunch of other kinds of projects can actually take advantage of this stuff. The other advantage is that this new configuration model, it's meant to be immutable first, so that we can parallelize builds a lot better. If you use Gradle, there's a configuration step that happens every time you run Gradle. That configuration time, because everything's immutable, we can introspect the build really quickly and reduce that configuration time. We aim to get it as close to 0 seconds as possible. So basically, what will happen over time is that we would like people to start trying out the new configuration model and start using that, because basically it gives Gradle all the answers up front, so that we can then analyze and do some really cool performance optimizations around that stuff. So the next thing that we announced was continuous mode. So a few other build tools have this thing, watch mode is probably what you know it as. So Gradle's now got a -T or -- continuous mode, which basically watches all the task inputs and outputs, and when anything changes, just goes off and starts running that whole build pipeline from wherever that is, and anything else that depends on that task keeps going. So there's going to be some demos that we'll post up online around that, and you'll be able to check that out, and you can start using it. If you get a Gradle Nightly, it's already there, and it's pretty good to use. We also announced this thing called Gradle.com. So Gradle.com, along with, because of this new configuration model, we basically get this ability to look at what you're doing and understand your builds a lot better, because we're actually modeling things a lot more closely. And because we're doing that, then we can actually start giving you some analytics about your builds and how long things take. And a few of these use cases are basically like if you're working in a big company with lots of teams, and you're kind of reluctant to bring in other people's changes, because you know that every time you bring in this other jar, it breaks the build. You know, we basically give you some insights into how often that event occurs and where the ordinary parts of your build are. So Gradle.com, we're still working on it, but it's you can go to there and sign up for a beta if you like, which I recommend that you do. So just to give you build insights and like history of your tests, pretty much similar to how, you know, your CI, say you've got a Jenkins and you can look at all the history of your builds. There's a similar aspect to that, basically saying Gradle's view of the world with every build that you do, not just on your CI, but just on each of your developer machines. And if you work, say, you've got a remote team in India and you've got remote teams everywhere else, you can see how fast their builds take versus your own builds. So a lot of cool stuff that's in the pipeline. BuildShip is a Eclipse plugin. So it's basically, there was a Eclipse plugin from SpringSource for Gradle. BuildShip, basically we've rewritten this support, and BuildShip is now a premier plugin for Gradle, which means that if you download Eclipse Mars, as of the next Eclipse Mars service pack release, you'll get BuildShip in there, and it's first-class Gradle support for BuildShip. So look, IntelliJ is one of the MELB-JVM sponsors, and a lot of us are IntelliJ fans, but there's still a big contingent that uses Eclipse, and it's a good way for Gradle to actually make a tooling API so that different IDEs can use Gradle. And basically it means that when we go forward, we can use Eclipse as a good learning API, a learning tool to learn Gradle, as well as run a whole lot of Gradle tasks and stuff like that. So the other things I'll just talk about quickly. We had guys from LinkedIn do talks, so they've been experimenting our play support. So you can start writing play apps with Gradle. That's probably worth a talk for a future MELB-JVM actually. There was a really good talk on Hadoop. So someone had actually wrote another DSL that sits within your Gradle DSL. You can model your Hadoop workflows and basically have Gradle pull your inputs together and use all the inputs and outputs and model your whole Hadoop pipeline as well. And then they had also done a really good thing with JavaScript, where their main problem was that they had a lot of web front-end developers who didn't like the ramp-up time that when you start a JVM app like Gradle, you've got to wait at least 1 second, and then you call off to this JavaScript process, and then you get the result back, and that just adds an overhead. So they wrote this little wrapper at the start to basically call out, depending on what command you ran, it would either run Ember or it would run Gradle. And for all the dependency stuff, it would run Gradle, produce this lock file, which all the JavaScript tooling could use for locking down your dependencies. And then it would, but for anything quick that basically minification and any kind of JavaScript processes, it would call off to Ember, and the response was really quick. So basically they had the best of both worlds. They got really good dependency management, but really fast JavaScript developer time, kept all the JavaScript developers happy, which is very important. And then the last thing I'm going to mention, we've recently got Unity on board. So Unity is the big game SDK, and it's multi-platform, and basically Unity chose to use Gradle because of its multi-platform support, because of the stuff we're doing in the new configuration model. So they're working with us to build that out. So we had a talk from Natusha from Unity, and she did a whole thing about all the new native support that's coming in Gradle. I was chatting to Thelina, where are you? Over there. So he was asking. A couple of years ago when we had Luke Daly from Gradle come here and do a talk, like the native support wasn't so great, but it's starting to build up now. So it's actually becoming another first-class citizen. And I think for anything that's Java or Android or C++ native code, Gradle's starting to get a look in with that. And so with that was my one slide. That was my update. So thank you very much. Question?
Yeah, the analytics stuff you were talking about, Gradle.com.
Yep.
I missed, is that something that gets sent out to the cloud, or can you set up some sort of server instance locally?
That was the most commonly asked question after we announced. So there may be a on-premise solution as well. So it was intended as a cloud, but yeah, I think there's so many people asking. So whatever that means, it's probably worth mentioning. There's something useful about sharing your data about your builds. And the thing is, going back to that use case of you've got a team that's distributed remotely and you don't know what they're doing. So I remember a job that I had a few years ago where I was working with a New Zealand team, and they deployed us in Melbourne just to work on the front end, and they did all their back end stuff. And we started using their Maven repository, and we're like, this takes a long time to resolve, like half a minute. And we're like, what's going on? And we just there were so many other things that didn't sound right anyway. So we just assumed that was just how they worked. And then we had a solution architect from their head office fly over, and he was like, yeah, it's really slow over here. Why is it taking so long? And how come you guys didn't say anything? And it was just like, well, yeah, everything else is just a bit of a pain. So there's these things that happen, and we see this happen through all of Gradle's clients as well. So Gradle does a lot of consulting as well, and so we see these things happen repetitively. And so we want to be able to flag that stuff really quickly. We want to also insulate you from things like upgrading your Gradle build if you know that you've got a plugin that doesn't work with the next version of Gradle. So we want to be able to give you a heads up about that kind of thing. And we've got all this metadata. Like basically, your Gradle build tells us a lot about what you're doing. And so we want to basically use that stuff to your advantage to basically tell you what dependencies are bad and everything like that.